kikayon. So this Rav Yitzchak, Reish Lakish identifies this kikayon as the kik that the Mishnah is talking about. Amar Rabba Bar Chana, Rava said, I actually have seen one of these Jonah's kikayon plants. The litzloliva dame. It's like a sloliva, which he translates here as a rhinoceros. Rashi says, the art scroll here says it's a plant with a large palm-like leaves and very thick oil. Castor oil translates here. So that's a ricinus plant. Umidifshike rave. It grows from like the moisture in ponds. V'alpum chanuta madlan yate, and people hang it on stores because it smells nice and it's and also would give shade. Umi partzidohi avde mishcha, and from its seeds people make oil. Uva anofahi naichan kol beriche de marava, and all the everybody in the West and in the Palestine would use it to, like, for shade if you were sick. Okay, so if you wanted relief from the sun, I guess, then you would. So this is a plant which fits the description in the book of Jonah, because it was there for him to have shade, and the fact that it smells nice is a nice thing too. You know, while you're resting from the sun, you might as well have something that smells nice. Anyway, so this is what this opinion thinks that the oil of keek is. Now, Amar Rabba, these wicks, which the rabbi said don't use them on Shabbat, because the flame kind of flickers. It doesn't hold steady. Shmanim sham, so that would lead you to want to adjust it. Shmanim shamru chachamim ein madlikim b'hem, and the oils that they said don't use them, because they don't get absorbed into the wick very well. So again, the flame might sputter, and you might come to fix it. Abai asked, Shmanim shamru chachamim ein madlikim b'hem Shabbat. These oils that you can't use on Shabbat, mahu sheyitin l'tochan shemen kol shehu v'yadlik. Now, what if you have a mixture? You've got this invalid oil, but you don't have a lot of fuel oil, and you need to use it on Shabbat. Can you adulterate it a little bit with some good oil, that some quality oil that will burn properly? So you have a mixture. So it seems like that would be okay, because you're not using pure invalid oil. But what he wants to know is, would the rabbis say that don't use this because next week, you'll forget, or whatever, you'll say, well, last week I used mostly, keek oil, and this week I'm going to use keek oil also, but you won't do the adulterating, and you'll be doing it, with completely with the wrong oil. I'm really leaking. So Rabbi answered him, no, you can't use it. You can't use this little mixture. My tama lefi, why? Lefi she'ein madlikin. Because you don't. Is what it means literally. Because I said so. I think what he means to say is because as the questioner asked, like, is it because you might come to next time use only the bad oil? So Eitve, but Abai asked, it's a trick question. It's like, so he led him into this question. Karach davar shemadlikim bo al gabei davar she'ein madlikim bo. When it comes to wicks, if you wrap something, a material that is not good, not valid for Shabbat wicks, and you wrap it with something that is good, ein madlikim bo, you can't use it. Amar Shimon ben Gamliel shel beit Abba hayu karchim ptila. Gabei goes. Amar Shimon Gamliel says, for example, in my father's house, they would put a valid wick material over a nut and use that. So katani mihat madlikim. So the Braita says that in the case of oil, of fuel, you can use mixed. So why did you tell me not to use? And actually, the example that Rabbi Shimon Gamliel brought from his father's house was a mixture of wicks. So you've got the oils and the wicks, where the Braita says that it's okay to use. So basically, I trapped you, right? Amarle. So he said, Ad the most Gamliel. Oh, you want to prove from Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel? Sayinhu midatanakama. You could, instead of disproving what I said, you could support me from the beginning of that Braita that you quoted, where the first Tana said, no, you can't use it. So halakasha. So the answer is, well, that's not that doesn't bother me. Maseh Rav, like the story told by Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel about his father's actual practice, and Rabban Gamliel was the Nasi. He was the exilarch. He was a significant person. So, personal testimony trumps these kind of received wisdom. The trumps what the Tana said. Because remember, again, we were talking about an oral culture, an oral system, and the way things were passed along or were taught was that there was people whose job it was to remember exactly what was taught in the yeshiva, and sometimes mistakes crept in, and that's why we have arguments in the first place, because of this. The oral system was not so good. But Rabbi is stating here that if you have personal testimony from somebody saying this is what I remember actually happened, how people actually practiced, that is more reliable than ivory tower stuff. So mikomakom kasha, but in any case, but even with Rabban Shimon, what Rabban Shimon's personal testimony, my love lahadlik. What does he permit? Isn't it to use a wick that's combined? So Rabbah says lo lahakpot. So Rabbah says no, it's not talking about combining materials. He was using some good material with a nut. The nut was used as a floater, right? So that the wick would float on top of the oil, right? If the wick drops down into the oil, it's liable to go out, right? So you have to support it so that it stays above the surface of the oil. And that's what the nut was for. So it wasn't that he was using the nut partially as a wick. No, he was using a proper wick. He was using cotton or whatever. And the nut was there to support the cotton. So it's not a proof that you can combine materials. So Abaya says, wait, if that's the case, so why forbid that? That's obviously a good thing, right? Why would the first Tana argue about this and say that you can't do it? So now Rabbi is trapped, and he's saying, okay, I'm going to reinterpret. Kula Rabban Shimon Gamliel. The whole thing, even the Tanakama, even the first Tana, is actually Rabban Shimon Gamliel. It's a deficient text, and this is what it should actually read. He's rereading the Braita. If you wrap something, a good material, over a bad material for a wick, you can't use that. When does this apply? That's if you're doing it so that both materials will burn, so to combine the actual wick. But if you're doing it if you're doing the bad material as a floater, right, then it's okay. Shimon ben Gamliel, as Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says, Gabe goes, my father's house, they used a nut along with the good wick. So rereading this Braita makes it come out that Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel is supporting the idea that you can only use it as a floater, but you can't use combined materials, bad and good, for the wick itself. Is that so? Now, let's go back to the original idea. Like, you add a drop of good oil to invalid oil. Now, you can see the obvious problem here, right? What's the characteristic of that mixture going to be, right? If it's just a small proportion of the good oil, it's going to behave like the majority, right? Rav Bruna said, if you have melted tallow or fish guts that have dissolved, you can put in just a little bit of good oil to it and light it. So how can you say it's no good? So Rabbah answers, Hane mimashche be'enayu. These two particular oils, melted tallow and fish guts, they are drawn into the wick by themselves without any oil, without any good oil. So they're good for lighting. The ones in the Mishnah that we said are no good, they're not drawn into the wick. So you're trying to bring me a proof from the case of fish guts. No, Mishnah never talked about fish guts. Fish guts actually work if you put a little oil, but these other things in the Mishnah don't tell me that you can put in a little bit of oil and they're going to work. So why did the rabbis say that include melted tallow and fish guts in forbidden oil, in oils that you can't use for the candle? Because maybe you'll come to use tallow that is not melted. You might use melted fish guts. Melted fish guts works, but you might come to use non-melted fish guts, like raw fish guts. That doesn't work so well. So that's why the rabbi said you can't use even the melted tallow and the melted fish guts, not because it won't work, but because you might come to use the non-melted variety, which does not work. So then they should also say that melted tallow and melted fish guts, so you want to tell me that, okay, they said you can't use melted fish guts because you might come to use fish guts. Why not say the same thing about melted fish guts with a little oil? Because you might come to use raw fish guts with a little oil, right? So why are you permitting melted fish guts with a little oil when you could say the same thing, that you're going to make a mistake next time and use raw fish guts with a little oil, which won't work so well? So the Rabbah answers, he gufa gzeira. The whole thing in the first place of not using melted fish guts is not because it doesn't work well. It's because what you might come to do next time. So don't add on another layer of staying away from it by saying, and also you can't use oil in melted fish guts because you might come to use oil in regular fish guts. That's like two steps removed. Okay, done with that.
So what was the original question here?
The original question was,
what
can you mix a little bit of valid fuel into invalid fuel and make the whole thing kosher?
No, but I mean, how did we even get to the question of wicks and oil when wasn't the original question, for all intents and purposes, can you light a fire can you cook something you put something in to cook before Shabbat comes in?
This is a throwback to 2 days ago.
Right.
Started the new parak. We're talking strictly about the flame that you light for warming and lighting your house, not cooking.
Okay.
So all these things we're talking about is your Shabbat candles, basically.
And so they're going down to the whole question of the wick and the material of the candle.
Right, because you might come to adjust it if it's not burning well.
This I'm just trying to see how much
sequence
minutia can flow. How small it gets.
Yeah.
It's just interesting, the process. That's all.
Right. Don't forget, when we started we're done with stuff that you do before Shabbat to prepare. Mm-hmm. Well, not really. I mean, you also light the candle on Shabbat, but we're now discussing strictly the light that you use for the flame that you use for Shabbat candles. Basically, we've moved on from the cooking.
Right. Okay.
All right. Tanya Rabbi Rachama asked the following: these wicks and oils which are not valid for Shabbat candles. You also can't use them in the temple. As presumably for the menorah, for the candelabra in the temple. Because when the Torah says you should light the menorah in the temple, it says to raise a flame continually. Yeah, so you can't use it in the temple, these bad wicks in the temple, because it has to produce a continual light. And these produce, as we've been assuming, a kind of a wavering kind of light. Hutani Lav Hu Amarla, he taught the Braita, and then he also commented on it. Kadesha Te Shalevet Ole Me'aleha, meaning that this just kind of fleshing out what he meant, that the flame has to be self-sufficient. It has to rise by itself. You can't be poking at it and improving it and getting it to work right. Not that it should be burning by assistance from some other means. Tanan, Mishnah, what about the worn out clothing of the Kohanim? They would tear them into strips, and they would use those for the wicks. In other words, they would recycle the clothing worn by the Kohanim. So the problem with that is that if you think about the clothing of the Kohen Gadol, they were made of wool and linen. And we said you can't use wool because it's not good quality. So how come they would use these? So the Gemara answers, I'm sorry, I left out the context. The context of this using of these wicks is, why did they need so many wicks? They would make torches for the Simchat Beit HaShoeva, which was the celebration in the temple on Sukkot. There was basically a big party in the temple on the occasion of the Nisuch HaMayim, the water libations on the altar. It was a big event. The Gemara, the Mishnah elsewhere discusses how many people would come, and it was considered a big deal, and it needed a lot of light. It was a nighttime thing when they brought the water up from the shilach, from the pool, and they needed lights. They needed torches, so they would recycle the old clothing of the Kohanim. So the answer is Simcha Beit HaShoeva Shane. Oh, that's different. You can't use it for the menorah, but you could use it for the Simchas Beit HaShoeva, for this party, because that's not even what the Torah is talking about. When the Torah says you have to have a steady flame, it's talking about the menorah, not about the Simchas Beit HaShoeva. Tashma, another proof about wool. Detani Rabba Bar Matna, Rabba thought, Big Day Kahuna Shabalu, worn out clothing of the Kohanim, again, Mafkiinotan, they would tear them, Mehen Hayosim Ptilot Lamikdash, and they would use that for the wicks for the temple. My love Dikilayim, aren't we talking about, and here we're not talking about the Simchat Beit HaShoeva. The only other purpose for a wick in the temple was the menorah. So aren't we talking about woolen mixtures, the clothes of the Kohen? The answers low, the boots. We're not talking about the wool and linen clothing. We're talking about the straight linen clothing, and linen. Flax is an okay material to use. So they would be, obviously, you would say, when they used clothes for the wicks, they would be sure to use only the valid material, the linen material. Hanan, looks like you're going to ask a question.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. In the Torah, the Big Day Kahuna, they sound like they have like intrinsic holiness. And here we're just like talking about like just, reusing them and, like, you know what I mean?
Well,
like they have no sense of kedusha or something.
Well, using them in the menorah?
Yeah, you're tearing them up, and ripping them and cutting them and
right. Well, they're worn out, but yeah, I think it's perfectly appropriate if they're worn out, right?
Right.
Use them anymore you could just like bury them, let's say, or you could reuse them for a holy purpose.
I like recycling. It's nice, but it's just. You're not supposed to use tefillin or something like that. That's says your tefillin are worn out, so I can use it to sew up my clothing or something. Or
well, but again, this is for using in the menorah in the temple.
Right. Okay.
So that's another holy purpose.
Okay.
And I would say it's different than using it for. Yeah, I would agree with you that you couldn't just use them for for your home.
Okay.
These invalid wicks and oils, also you can't use them for Hanukkah, Hanukkah candles. Here with Shabbat, it's like you can't use them for your Hanukkah candles on any day of the week. Amar Rav Huna, my Talmud Rav Huna, why not? Kasavar kavta zakukla. Because he holds that if a Hanukkah candle, and now for the next little while, we're going to talk exclusively about Hanukkah. So put aside Shabbat. When it comes to Hanukkah candles, what happens if the candle goes out? Okay, so for Shabbat, we know you can't relight the candle, right? Because it's Shabbat. What happens on Hanukkah, where it's a Sunday, and you can, let's say you've lit your candle, it's got plenty of fuel in it, and then the wind comes and blows it out. Do you have to light it again, or have you already performed the mitzvah? I mean, there's nothing wrong with lighting it again, but are you required to light it again? So Rav Huna must hold that you do have to light it again, and that's why that's why you can't use these materials, because you're kind of putting yourself, you're lighting a candle which doesn't really have the potential to last as long as it should last. And mutar l'shtamesh l'ra, and also we can see that Rav Huna must hold that you're allowed to use the light of the Hanukkah candles, because that is what would lead you to notice. Excuse me. That's what would lead you to notice that it's flickering and that you have to relight it. Rav Chizda says madlikin b'hen b'chol. You can use them on Hanukkah, avolo b'Shabbat, but not on Shabbat. Kasavar, why? Kavta, because he holds kavta ein zakukla. He would hold that you don't have to relight it. And that it's permissible to use it, to use the light for yourself. And the third opinion, Amar Rav Zera Amar Matna, Amar Rav Zera Amar Rav. Rav Zera said these invalid wicks and oil, and madlikim b'hem Shabbat, the ones that you can't use on Shabbat. Madlikim b'hem b'Chanukah, you can use them on Chanukah bein b'chol bein b'Shabbat, no matter what day of the week it is. Amar Rav Yirmiyah, my Talmud Rav, what is his reason? Kasavar kavta ein zakukla. He would have to hold that you don't have to put it out, that you don't have to relight it. I'm sorry, if it goes out. And you cannot use its light for reading, because if you were allowed to make use of these Hanukkah lights, it wouldn't be clear that they were lit for the mitzvah. Or other Rishonim explain that basically, since what are we commemorating with the Hanukkah candles? We're commemorating the oil that was found for use in the menorah in the temple, right? So they patterned the mitzvah after the original use. So just as the menorah had to be lit with proper oil, so too the Hanukkah candles has to be lit with proper oils. The rabbis taught this to Abaye, or before Abaye. He didn't buy it. He didn't accept Rav Yirmiyah's explanation. Ata Rabin came. They said the same thing before Abaye. And this time he accepted it. Amar Izachai Gemirte Lishmate Meikara. If I had been worthy, I would have learned Rav's teaching earlier. But he learned it now. Like, what's the difference when he learned it? Because when you learn something when you are young, you remember it better. So he's saying that it would have been better if I learned this when I was young, and I would have remembered it properly. So now we're going to examine this more about Ner Chanukah. But Kafsa in Zakukla, is it true that these opinions held that you don't have to relight your Hanukkah candle if it blew out, or minhu? That's the question. Mitzvata, the proper time for lighting Hanukkah candles, mishatishkachama, from when the sun sets, ad shetichla regel min hashuk, until the traffic from the marketplace, till rush hour is over, basically. My love, the ikavta hadar madlik. Like the time for lighting Hanukkah candles is from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. Doesn't that mean it has to remain burning through all that period? And if it blew out, what would you conclude? You'd have to relight it. right? By saying like this is the period for it to be lit. Gemara says, well, no, that's not what it means. The ilo adlik madlik. We're talking about the start time, right? When is the proper time for starting to light, for lighting the Hanukkah candles, not for how long it needs to burn. What's the window of opportunity for lighting it? That is from, from sunset till the end of rush hour. Not that it has to burn through that whole period. I mean, or you could explain it with shiura. It's telling you like how much oil should you put in there. You should put enough, or how large a candle should you use. It should be large enough to burn that whole time through that whole window. However, if it blew out, you in order to do the mitzvah, you have to give it the potential to burn that long. But if it blows out, it blows out. You could say that. In other words, you're not. It's not necessary to say that that it has to burn through the whole period. Now, what does that mean till people have left the marketplace, which I equated to the end of rush hour. Biad kama, when is that? Rabba Rabba answered, until the Tarmodians have left the market. The Tarmodians, according to Rashi, were basically people who sold wood, right? So it's like the people who sell umbrellas in the rain. It's like they're the last ones, when the rain has stopped. Okay, so when the wood people going home at night, they're the last thing they're going to need, or is even after the butcher shops close because it's past dinner time, but latecomers still need to warm their house at night. So that would be the measure of when rush hour is over, is when these Tarmodoians have left their market, their stalls.
How does Rashi know that? I mean, that's like always a question.
Yeah, I haven't wondered about that. I mean, I suppose it's a tradition. Like he learned it from his teacher, learned from their teacher, etc. Going back to people who actually knew what these Talmudians were, and Rashi was the one who bothered to write it down for us.
Right. Okay, that could be.
But it's a good question. I've often wondered about that.
Yeah.
Rabbi's time. Mitzvahs Chanukah ner ishu.
Now you know what it is also.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Assuming Rashi is correct.
Yeah. Yeah. Mitzvahs Chanukah ner ishu. So what is the mitzvah of Chanukah, of lighting candles? Really, the mitzvah is one candle for a person. Okay, so one candle every night of Hanukkah, one candle for the whole house. Mahadrin, and those who, it's unclear exactly what Mahadrin means. It could mean people who hidur mitzvah, who want to adorn the mitzvah, want to do it the nicest possible way, or it could mean people who run after the mitzvah, like people who are very eager to do the mitzvah or something of that nature. But as a shorthand, we'll say the people who are very punctilious about the mitzvah. So what is their practice? You have one candle for every member of the household, but every night it's the same. First night, if you have 3 people in your household, you have 3 candles first night, 3 candles the second night, 3 candles the third night, etc. Those elite who are really, really punctilious about the mitzvah. Beit Shammai says you go 8 the first night, 7 the second night, 6 the third night, etc. And Beit Hillel Omrim Yom Rishon Madlik Achad Mikav Ve'elech Mosif V'holech. Of course, this is our practice. You start on the first day with 1 candle, then 2, then 3, then 4, then 5 through 8. What's interesting here, by the way, is that it's not stated explicitly. Whether the very punctilious, if that applies, if you have 3 people in your house, so it's the set of increasing candles, 1, then 2, then 3, then 4, then 5, is that for the whole household? Or should you do that for every person in the household? So that on the first night, everyone lights 1 candle. On the second night, everyone lights 2 candles, right? It's not clear. Of course, that our practice generally is, interestingly enough, we all practice like the Mahadrin Mina Mahadrin, the very punctilious about this mitzvah. And I think the general practice is one for each person in the house, although typically a person and their spouse is considered like one person. Anyways, I believe there's a dispute over which way to go now with that. But in any case, no matter which way you come out on that, since the basic mitzvah is just one candle every night for the whole household, you're always covered, right? It's just a question of what's the best practice. Amarullah, there was a dispute between these two Palestinian Amoraim rabbis, Rabbi Yossi bar Avin, Rabbi Yossi bar Zvida. Rabbi Yossi, the son of Avin, and Rabbi Yossi, the son of Zvida. So you can see how we might have got their opinions mixed up since they're both named Yossi. Chadamar Tamad Beit Shammai Kneged Yamim Nichnasim. Why did Beit Shammai and Hillel argue about whether you start high and go low or start low and go high? Right? You start with 8 candles and count down to 1, or you start with 1 and count up to 8. So what's the reason for this dispute? That's what they argued about. One said, Kneged Yamim Nichnasim. Beit Shammai is basically just counting the days to come. Talmud Beit Hillel, Kneged Yamim Ayotzi. They're counting the days already passed, right? So, but either way, like, it's just a marker for how many days. They argue about whether you should start with the larger number, go down to the smaller, or whatever, but they're not arguing about anything fundamental. The other opinion was, why are they arguing? That Beit Shammai is Keneged Parei HaChag, because it corresponds to the number of sacrifices that were brought on Sukkot, right? On Sukkot, the first day they brought, I think it was 13 sacrifices, then 12, 11, then 10, then 9, and 8, right? They counted down. So Beit Shammai says, let's do the same thing with Hanukkah candles. Talmud Beit Hillel holds the Malin B'Kodesh Ve'in Moridin. There's another thing, rule in the temple, not the number of sacrifices that were mandated for Sukkot, but in general, you always increase what you're doing. You start from the low end and increase what you're doing.
It's interesting because I think in one of the books of Maccabees, it talks about like how Hanukkah was like really a replacement for Sukkot.
Yes, very good. Like, why would we use the sacrifices of Sukkot for Hanukkah? Right. Because, as Hanan says, the book of Maccabees describes that year they were kind of upset that they missed Sukkot because of they were still involved in the war and the oppression of the Greeks and so on. When they finally overcame that,
suppression, not oppression.
I'm sorry?
Suppression of the Greeks, not oppression. You said oppression of the Greeks. Oh, the Greeks are oppressing them. Okay, I got it.
Yeah, all right, thank you. Got it. So when they 2 months later, when they were victorious, they were like, we missed Sukkot this year. What are we going to do? That was actually one of the motivations for establishing the holiday of Hanukkah. So we follow the procedure from Sukkot. Yeah, 1 second. Okay. Amar Rabba bar Chana Rabbi Yochanan. Rabba said, Shnei Zakenim hayu b'Sidon. There were 2 elders in Sidon, in Sidon. Echad asaka Beit Shammai, echad asaka Beit Hillel, and they had different practices. One did, started low and went high, and the other started high and went low. Zenoten Hamud Barav. One gave the reason Keneged Parei HaChag, because he's doing it like the Sukkot offerings, which diminished as he went along. Zenoten Talmud Varav, and the other one also gave a reason, the Malin B'Kodesh Ve'in Moridin. So we're just repeating what we said about the reasoning of Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. Tana Rabbanan, where do we put the Hanukkah candle? At the entrance of the house, at the door. Mibachutz, on the outside. And if you live on the 2nd floor, and you don't have an outside door, like the stairs going up to your place were from the inside, like a loft. Then you put it in the window facing the outside. Ubishana sakana, and if it's a time of danger, meaning presumably that you're afraid of retribution by non-Jews if you light these Hanukkah candles. Then don't display it to the outside. It's fine just to put it on your own table, and that's good enough. Amar Rava. Rava says, here's another detail. Don't only have the Hanukkah candle burning in your house. You should have another candle burning to use for its light, because you can't, as we saw before, he's of the opinion that we saw before that you can't use the light of the Hanukkah candle. So you have to have some other candle to provide light. But if there's a like a fireplace or whatever, a torch in the house, in other words, there's another source of light. So I guess what you're not supposed to do is use the Hanukkah candle to read by, let's say, or for some other use, right? Like you can't go close to that specific candle and use it for its light. But if there's another source of light in the room, it's fine, because you can assume that, you're using some of the other light as well. Like light doesn't, you can't discriminate which light am I using. You can't really tell. But if you're an important person, meaning that you would ordinarily have a reading lamp, you wouldn't sit and read with the main light of the room. You would have a reading lamp, right? Because you're an important person. So even if there's a light on in the room, you would still have a specific light for reading. So you can't use the Hanukkah candle for that purpose, even if there is another light in the room, because then it looks like what's the reason for your Hanukkah candle is for your reading, and it doesn't publicize the miracle, right? The whole point of lighting the Hanukkah candle is to publicize the miracle of Hanukkah. So by using it for if a regular person who uses it for light, you can say, well, he's just reading by the light of the room in general, and this light he happens to be there. But if you're somebody who would only read with a reading lamp, then your reading lamp can't be your Hanukkah candle. Now, my Hanukkah, as the Gemara typically does, like we start with some details and then we get to the point much later. The point is Hanukkah, right? You start talking about Hanukkah. There's no other place in the Gemara that discusses Hanukkah and the rules of Hanukkah and so on. So what's this all about? The Tana Rabban. Here's the Braita. B'kafei b'kislev yomei Hanukkah. The Mishnah in Tanis lists all kinds of days throughout the year that you can't that are special days. So, for example, days that you can't fast on because they have some happy event that occurred. There's some kind of celebratory nature to them. So the 25th of Kislev is one of the days that it mentions, and those are the days of Hanukkah. Taman Yamin, there's 8 days. Don't give eulogies on them and don't fast on those days. Because when the Greeks entered the temple, the sanctuary, they contaminated they made them all tamei. All the oil in the temple was made tamei, and then it couldn't be used for the menorah. And when the Greeks were defeated by the Hasmoneans, so now they wanted to restart the temple service. They couldn't find any pure oil, and they only found one jug of oil. That was still intact with the seal of the Kohen Gadol. And there was only enough oil in it to light the menorah for one day. Nasebones, and a miracle happened, and it lasted for 8 days. Notice, by the way, that the way we're taught this in school is that 8 days was as long as it took for them to get fresh oil.
Right. But
that's not how the Gemara puts it. The Gemara just says the miracle happened and it lasted for 8 days. The next year, at another time, they said, "Oh, let's make this a recurring holiday every year." We say hello, we sing praises to God, and there's Thanksgiving. So that's the origin of Hanukkah. It's not Hasan. we have another Mishnah there. Gates hayotzei mitachat hapatish v'yatsa v'hizik. This seems to be a little off topic, but you'll see in a minute what the connection is to Hanukkah. So let's say you're a blacksmith, and your sparks come out of your work. So a spark comes out of the blacksmith's work, and it goes and damages somebody else's property, right? Chayav, you're liable. Gamal shatoun pishtan v'hu aver b'rshut rabim. What about if there's a camel full of flax and it's walking through the street? V'nichnasa pishtano l'toch hachanut, and it's a wide load, and it crosses the boundary of the blacksmith's shop. The Delkab and or not necessarily a blacksmith, but whatever, it's inside the shop, and it catches fire from the candle of the storekeeper. Vidlik sabira, and the whole thing burns, and it burns a house, burns the whole building. Bal hagamal chayav. Who's responsible? The camel driver. Okay, because the camel driver allowed his material to to go into private property and and catch fire, and so he's responsible for the damage caused by the fire. What if the candle is outside the store, right? And the camel passes by and it catches fire? Then it's the storekeeper's responsibility. What are you doing putting a flame in the public domain? It's normal for people to walk by with camels loaded with flax. It's your fault that it caught fire. Rabbi Yehuda says if it's a Hanukkah candle, then the storekeeper is not liable. I guess because the camel driver should have known that it's Hanukkah, and he should have taken care. If I'm walking my camel through the street, I better make sure that it doesn't catch fire from all the Hanukkah candles. But if the candle out there is unexpected by the camel driver, then it's the responsibility of the person who put the candle in the street. Amar Ravina Mishum D'Rabba. Ravina said, Zosomeres, this means Ner Chanukah Mitzvah Manicha B'toch Asara. So we conclude from this, it must be that where do you place the Hanukkah candle? So we already said you place it outside your door, but now he's concluding that it has to be within 10 tfachim of the ground. Because if you want to say you could place your Hanukkah candle above 10 tfachim, whoever lost the property in the fire could say to the storekeeper, sure, you have to light Hanukkah candles, but put it up high so it doesn't cause any damage. The fact that we don't say that, and we say that it's the camel driver's fault, he should have looked out for Hanukkah candles, that means that it must be because that's the place where you're supposed to put Hanukkah candles, and you can't put them way up high. But the Gemara says, well, maybe not. Maybe really you could put the candle up high, but we're not going to say that people should put their candles up high, because it's more of a job. It's a bigger job. You have to set up some platform or whatever. You have to climb a ladder. It's like, no, I'm not going to do that. Forget about the Hanukkah candles. I'm not going to go to all that trouble. The rabbis wanted to encourage people to light Hanukkah candles. So maybe even though it's valid to put your Hanukkah candles up high, the rabbis making the rules of torts and damages still assumed that people would prefer to light it down lower to the ground where it's easier, and so they made it the responsibility of the camel driver to watch out for the Hanukkah candles. Okay, I guess let's do another line. Might as well get onto the new page. I'm Rav Kana. Rav Kana said, Darish Rav Natan Bar Miyumi Mishmei de Ravi Tanto. Ravi Nassan said, Ner Chanukah Sheini Chalamala Miyasrim Amah. If you put your Hanukkah candle higher than 20 amot, which is like 30 feet high,
like mud.
That's invalid because nobody will notice it. Similar to the law of a sukkah, you can't have your schach, the roof of the sukkah, higher than 20 amot. And also, when it comes to making an eruv chaserot, which we'll discuss in greater detail, but you have to construct this kind of virtual wall. the top beam of that virtual wall can't be higher than 20 amot because nobody will notice it's there. Same thing with the Hanukkah candle. It has to be in a place where people will see it. And that is a good place to stop for today.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
everybody. I guess I haven't talked to Ellie, but I suppose he'll probably be doing Saturday night again. I'll see if he can send out a notice to confirm.
Thank
Very
you.
good. Thank you.